Cold sidewalks in Toronto, a snowbound stretch of southern Ontario highways, and a trade deal with the U.S. suddenly back in question. Today's through line is what happens when routine systems start to wobble. Later in the brief, the one timeline that matters most for Canada's trade relationship this year, and what to watch for next. Toronto's waking up to deep cold. Today looks sunny, with a temperature around minus 19 degrees Celsius. Across southern Ontario, the bigger issue is what's just happened, and what may linger. Parts of the region were hit by a major snowstorm and near whiteout conditions, with police calling some roads hazardous and at points impassable. The practical takeaway this morning: even if your street looks fine, conditions can change quickly once you're on exposed highways, especially in open areas where blowing snow piles back in. And two reminders of what that looks like in real life. Ottawa police are investigating a fatal head-on crash near Richmond that killed a 63-year-old woman. Separately, in Tiny Township, a head-on crash during a heavy snowstorm sent 2 people to hospital with minor injuries. In both cases, investigators are asking for witnesses and dashcam video, because in winter collisions, small details about speed, visibility, and lane position can end up mattering. Now, to sports. Quickly, and then we'll raise the stakes. For the Maple Leafs, the conversation is starting to sharpen around the trade deadline. 2 player storylines are getting attention. One look at defenseman Travis Dermott, once projected as part of Toronto's future blue line, and now fighting to stay in the league. And another argument that forward Nick Robertson shouldn't be dealt in any deadline shakeup, because moving a young, controllable player at the wrong moment can set a team back. For the Raptors, the message from analysts is that one good win, like the recent one over Chicago, doesn't erase structural problems, especially on defense. The bigger point is about the upcoming summer. Toronto has flexibility and assets, and the risk is stagnation if the front office stays too cautious. Turning now to the primary thread, Canada's trade posture with the U.S. and the uncertainty around CUSMA, the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement. Canada's outgoing ambassador to Washington, Kirsten Hillman, is being unusually blunt about the core problem. She says she can't tell whether President Trump wants to keep CUSMA because his comments swing in different directions. He praised the agreement when it was signed. More recently, he's called it irrelevant. And this matters now because the deal is up for review this year. At the same time, Canada and the U.S. are still locked in a tariff-driven trade fight that began after broad U.S. tariffs were imposed on Canadian imports last February. Here's the key point. When a trade deal is under formal review, uncertainty itself becomes a cost. Businesses delay investment, supply chains look for workarounds, and political leaders start positioning for multiple outcomes. Everything from a negotiated update to a partial rollback to a broader confrontation. Hillman's prescription is less dramatic and more procedural. Keep working U.S. stakeholders, governors, industry groups, companies, who can tell the White House what CUSMA does for American jobs and competitiveness. In other words, build pressure from inside the U.S. system, not just across the negotiating table. Mid-brief marker, this connects to the political conversation at home, too. A reader debate playing out in Canada right now is about what kind of posture works best with a Trump-led America. Some argue that Mark Carney's higher international profile, boosted by his Davos appearance, could help Canada carry influence in Washington, or at least get listened to. Others argue the opposite approach: keep a low profile, focus on salvaging what remains of CUSMA, and avoid giving regional tensions inside Canada more oxygen, particularly claims that decisions are being driven by an Ottawa bubble. That's opinion, but it points to a real strategic choice. Canada can try to lead loudly or negotiate quietly. The risk here is that either approach can backfire if it's not matched to what the U.S. administration is actually responding to week by week. There's also a domestic politics layer. Polling analyst Nick Nanos is highlighting how conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's numbers can look different depending on whether he's tested against Justin Trudeau or a hypothetical Mark Carney. And the important caution is about geography. National vote share doesn't automatically translate into seats, because what matters is where support is concentrated, riding by riding. Before we close, one consumer story worth keeping on your radar because it affects everyday costs and trust. Quebec authorities fined Canadian Tire nearly $1.3 million after an investigation found inflated, regular prices used to make discounts look bigger. Canadian Tire pleaded guilty to dozens of counts under Quebec's Consumer Protection Act and says the issue involved a small set of products from several years ago, with no customer overcharges. And at the Supreme Court, it's agreed to hear an Air Canada pricing case tied to whether mandatory fees and taxes were properly included in advertised fares, an appeal in a long-running class action, with the previous damages award in the range of $10 million. No hearing date yet, but it's one to watch for how fares are displayed online. Final orientation: what to watch next. On trade, watch for any signal about the CUSMA review process, who's leading the file, what the U.S. says it wants changed, and whether tariffs remain a bargaining chip or become a permanent feature. On the ground in Ontario, watch road condition advisories closely. The storm may pass, but blowing snow and deep cold can keep travel risky. And in Toronto sports, the next inflection point is the Leafs' deadline posture, whether big move talk becomes real, and who's treated as part of the future versus a trade asset. That's the brief for Sunday, February 8th.